I think that a lot of Americans forget people who were there before them and who still are.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and for you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Yvonne Wakim Dennis. I am Cherokee, Sandhill, and Syrian. And I am speaking today from Ithaca, New York, where I live part-time. And whatever I say today are my own words. I'm not speaking on behalf of any group, nation, or organization. I'm an educator, a writer, and a social worker. And I always love to do activities and projects with senior citizens, which is good because I'm now one too. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Janet Rose, and I am a resident at Princeton Senior Living in Lee Summit, Missouri. I grew up in Wisconsin for 60 years before I knew enough to move closer to warmer weather, and I do love it in this whole area. I am a former teacher. I taught home economics and enjoyed it very much.
Great. So I understand that you have, this is Native American Heritage Month, and I appreciate the inclusivity of Arrow that they are including us, including Indigenous people. And I understand, Janet, that you have some topics that you'd like to discuss. So please feel free to go ahead. Before we start, though, can I just do a land acknowledgement?
Sure.
Okay. Today we acknowledge that we are connecting on the traditional homelands of the Cayuga Nation, Chickasaw, Lenape, Illini, Kansa, Iowa, Otoe-Missouri, Osage, Quapaw, Sac and Fox, Shawnee, Wyandotte, Ottawa, and Miami. We give great gratitude for the historic and contemporary presence on these lands that preceded Ohio, Missouri, and New York states and the United States of America. We acknowledge the painful history of the original people's dispossession, genocide, and honor the ongoing connection of these people, past, present, and future, to these lands and waters. Wanishi Wado.
Yes, true. Well, I'm happy to acknowledge that I understand some of the things that have happening with Native Americans. Living up in Wisconsin, where the land that I grew up on had been owned by Native Americans, and actually they sold this property to my family years and years ago. I do not know what year that would have been, but Chief High-Knocker of the Winnebago tribe came to my grandfather, or had his son, Henry Dick, come and talk and name the farm Montepacataca. And so they came back summers and camped in the woods and collected willows and made baskets. So I was too small to remember seeing that happening, but I heard a lot about it.
That's wonderful. And it's wonderful that you have a recent connection, because we all, even though this isn't my traditional homelands, mine are farther south, but this is the traditional homelands of the Cayuga. And I think that a lot of Americans forget even Native people moving from one place to another may forget the people who were there before them and who still are. That's one of the mistakes that many people make. It's that there are no more Native people. And indeed, most of our big cities were Native cities at one point. And of Native people, yes, were pushed out, but not everyone. So there are still a lot of Indigenous people in the areas. I think your state has almost 100,000 Indigenous people. And although Missouri doesn't have any formal Indigenous nations, when I say formal, I mean recognition by the state or federal government, there's still several. I think there are 7 bands located in Missouri and maybe 9 in Ohio. So people, have managed to survive and in many cases thrive colonization. But one of the things that I spoke with Aaron about was Christopher Columbus and what do we think of him? And I think most people remember that poem, 1492, but I want to read you a rewrite from a Native perspective by a writer, an Indigenous writer, Dana Hall. And this is how it goes. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but everything else in this childhood rhyme ignores the historic details and genocide. The overland route between Asia and Spain was closed, making trade very hard to maintain. But Oriental goods were in high demand. A new route would allow this exchange to expand. Aristotle had proved that the world was round. You could reach Eastern Asia by sailing westbound. The ancient Greeks calculated the length of the trip, far exceeding the range of the most modern ship. Columbus made absurd and outrageous guarantees about his nautical calculations and skills at sea. But despite reservations expressed by the king, he was given 3 ships outfitted by the queen. He set sail in August of 1492. His logbook describes what he planned to do: to take wealth and riches wherever they were found. His thievery would become historically profound. Columbus reached islands in the Caribbean Sea, not even close to where he thought he should be. He said there was gold and made other false claims to gain the support for more voyages from Spain. Columbus described the natives as being generous, hospitable, and very agreeing. Not quarrelsome, excitable, devoid of hate, he exclaimed they'd be easy to dominate. He made several voyages to the Caribbean Sea, visited the mainland where he thought Asia should be. He colonized the region and controlled everything, destroying the culture and lives of every human being. He appointed himself governor. No one disagreed. Extermination of the natives could then proceed. Their homes and lands were taken by force. Those not killed were enslaved without remorse. He created a tribute system, very tragic to behold, intended to fulfill Spain's unending lust for gold, requiring a quota from every native over 14, or their hands were cut off. Death became quite routine. Natives were raped at will and many used as slaves. The rest were exterminated in a variety of ways, by burning, hanging, cut in pieces or in half. Babies swung by the feet and their skulls were smashed. He initiated the conquest and genocide during his expeditions. 9 million people died. Following the civilization of the Western Hemisphere, 100 million vanished as a result of European profiteers. Columbus didn't keep the promises made to the crown, and a sea route to Asia he never found. He could not deliver on his guarantees of gold, but colonizations of the Americas began to unfold. So that's what I think of Columbus. And indeed, he was not a nice man.
Well, one of the things that people sometimes get wrong, they think that Columbus really landed in the United States. You know, they think it was the East Coast. And see, that wasn't true. Like you in that article, it was in the islands. I mean, we have to say that it was in North America. That's true. But really, the things that resulted from coming and meeting these Native Americans, they would have never survived, because the Native Americans were the people that taught them how to grow things and how to find water and all of these things. So
that's it, and we are known for our hospitality. And we're not the only people in the world who are known for that, but it's just that it was used against us. And one of the reasons, and I don't know if you know about this, Janet, but one of the main reasons that cleared or that removed any type of guilt or maybe remorse, or maybe, hey, those are human beings, maybe we shouldn't be killing them, was what's now called the doctrine of discovery. And attorney Stephen Newcomb, who is Lenape, he actually went to the Vatican and for years studied the original documents. And what the papal bulls said, and that was all turned into what's called the doctrine of discovery, is that sure, the Bible says it's not right to kill. However, if it's non-Christians and if it results in profits and prosperity for the church, then it's okay. So from that, Christian people thought that they, had ultimate dominion over other people in the world, and which is, funny, because Christianity is not even the oldest religion in the world. And when we look at Christianity at the words of Jesus, it's far from killing and conquering anyone. But anyway, we were called heathens, and we, that started, that whole doctrine of discovery started even manifest destiny, and the Christians felt that, not all the Christians, please, hear me. I don't like to group I don't like to say a group of people is all the same. But the thinking was that God said, go out and spread Christianity and go to North America and manifest destiny. God said it was our right to go and do all these things. Well, we all have the same higher power, and I don't think that the higher power gave anyone or gives anyone dominion over other people. But unfortunately, that doctrine of discovery became law. And most of the laws in the world today, when it comes to Indigenous people, come from the doctrine of discovery. It established spiritual, political, and legal justification for colonization and seizure of land not inhabited by Christians. And our Supreme Court, our system here, when it comes to Indian law, is based on the doctrine of discovery. And even as recently, it was used in an argument by Ginsburg that, she ruled against the Seneca people in in a case because she said the doctrine of discovery had supreme, we had to go back to that. And which was funny because she was Jewish and her people were excluded from, they weren't Christian. So, the Christians were the ones who were considered the best people in the world and could just go take anyone over. So that's what our US law is based on today.
Mm-hmm. It is. And then the treaties came after that, right?
Well, the treaties and there's not one treaty that hasn't been broken.
There were many.
Yes, and many, many treaties. And then now what is the United States includes the Kingdom of Hawaii. And Hawaii is the Royal Palace in Hawaii had plumbing, electricity, and telephones before the White House. And their king, one of their kings was the first person to sail around the world visiting, other countries.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and now the Native Hawaiians have a horrible, in fact, Hawaii is considered the endangered species capital of the world. So their whole system, from flora to fauna to culture to everything, has been really, really damaged by colonization. But they are, like us, indigenous people whose country was taken over and annexed to the United States. Another, speaking to Aaron about what are Indian lands? What is your feeling about? Do you have any thoughts about that, Janet? Like what's a reservation? What's Indian land?
Oh, pretty much so. The natives were driven out of certain areas and told to stay in another area, which is called our reservations now. And there's not just one. I think every state probably has several gathering places, or what they call a reservation. And it's a drawn out area, actually.
Yes. We often ended up on lands that were not good agricultural places, but once they discovered fossil fuels were on our lands, then they wanted that too, like Oklahoma. Oklahoma was considered Indian territory, and people were forced there. Some people, negotiated and got land that was closer to their original homelands. Meanwhile, the original people in Oklahoma, they weren't asked, can we put all these other groups there? But Oklahoma was supposed to be Indian territory forever. But once oil was discovered, well, that went south. Pretty fast.
Area. They're the richest area.
Yeah. But there are different types of native lands. For instance, it's all native land, but we'll say communities. For instance, the rancheras in California. There are a few differences between a reservation and a ranchera. But for some reason, that's the only place where it's called rancheros, although there are reservations there too. Pueblo. The reservations in Arizona and New Mexico are often called pueblos. Trust lands. Trust lands, those are lands held in trust by the US government for Native nations and sometimes individual Native people. Then you have the checkerboard lands, which it's very difficult to have your community on checkerboard land. That's where there's a combination of non-tribal owned lands and native lands. So they're resulting in a checkerboard pattern. So you may have to go across somebody else's land to get to the other part of your community. Because of the general, Allotment Act of 1887 also called the Dawes Act, Indian communities became splintered and cut off from each other. And but different non-natives thought that might hasten assimilation, like if we can't live together, if we're separated out, and keep us from organizing. But it's hard because if you're if you want to do agriculture, your land is all divided. And it also affects the use of the land for traditional purposes. Then we have what's called fee lands, and those are parcels owned within reservation boundaries, but owned by non-native people. And then you have dependent Indian communities, a lot of the Alaska villages, where it's an area set apart for the use of native people under the government. And ceded territory, which is lands within a reservation or other legal native areas that have been sold by a tribe or seized by the US government. But native nations still have certain rights like hunting and fishing. And we were just talking about Hawaii, and Hawaii they don't have a reservation system. They have the native Hawaiian homelands. And unfortunately, today there are only less than 10,000 native Hawaiians have been awarded homestead lands, and there's almost 30,000 people on the waiting list. And the lands are often in places where no bank is going to want to give a mortgage, maybe the environment is not great, or they're in places where people can't work. There's no work there. So it was a nice idea, but it's not working.
I can see where, change takes place because of different reasons in that. But for instance, our Native Americans, I know in Wisconsin, and I think all the way down here, their big thing is they develop these casinos to raise money. And that has been a huge success for them. Up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, the Indians, as they call them up there, not just Native Americans, they were able to go into Green Bay, and they have bought up all kinds of businesses and homes and everything else. They have really spread out. And it's not really reservation land that they're on. They have gone into the community. One person that lives in Green Bay recently told me they felt that almost a third of the businesses in Green Bay, Wisconsin, are now owned by the Indians, by that reservation.
Well, that's good news. I mean, it's going back, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Most Indigenous peoples had some type of gambling, gaming, competition. And but now all the casinos are are money making. Some people some tribes are in a lot of debt, and some are very successful. And it varies. But one of the things about the casino owning people, the casino owning nations, is that very often they put money back into the community, maintaining the area and so on. And
especially in education and medical.
Yes. And with all that going on, Indian people are still the poorest in the country. So people think we're all rich, but we're not. And there are, even though education has been written into every treaty, we have the highest dropout rate. And then some Indigenous nations have more college graduates compared to the non-native people in their area. So, but across the board, education is something that really needs to be addressed and with most native people today.
Well, some of the issues, I don't know what to do with some of the things, but for instance, materials and things that are taken from the groups of people, like it mentioned museums, for instance. If you find things, artifacts, in other words, and then, what should you really do with them? Because you want to share them, and that's what keeps this whole thing alive. If people can see what these people had lived by, whether it's pieces of pottery or whether it's arrowheads or other countries, whatever they have that made this group special. I don't see anything wrong with a museum if it's used correctly, that if you want to learn more about a certain people. And, we can't just talk either about Native Americans, because every country actually has these people that were natives. Australia has them. India. A big one is China. They have their own people that were native too. So
what I believe is that indigenous wisdom of the world, whether it's the Sami people in Europe or the Ainu people in Japan or the Igbo people in Nigeria, the Mayan people, wherever indigenous ways and wisdom can resolve most of our contemporary problems. So it's time for people to start listening to the ancient traditions where people had to live in harmony and consider ourselves part of nature, not like we are natural, right? So when you say set yourself apart from the natural world, because the earth is all of our mothers. And so I think she's the mother to all of us. And if we go back and listen to many of these ancient ways, it'll give us a way to move to the future. And instead of destroying our planet. And I'm not saying indigenous people didn't have any issues way back when, of course, but there's still certain knowledge that will be very helpful to all of us in contemporary society. Well, the Tomaquag people, they were in northwestern Mississippi, and then they had trading routes all over, and eventually they are now located in central Louisiana, and they acquired a lot of wealth in European I guess in Europe, by European standards. And that it was called the Tunica, or is called the Tomaquag treasure. And as per their custom, when people who own these objects were died, many times they were their wealth was buried with them. And it became, those grave sites became an attraction for many looters. And these were beautiful, like china, vases, plates, all these things that they had acquired through trade. And so they went to battle, really. They went to battle in the courts to get their treasures back, and they did. And that was one of the reasons why we have NAGRA today, which is Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Art. And not only did they get them back, but the people learned how to, preserve the objects, how to curate them. There, a whole lot of learning came out of that. And then other nations wanted to get things back too, and did. And many things were repatriated with great pomp and ceremony, and people, to get back your your cultural belongings was incredible. And then people, many museums still have the bones of our ancestors, whole bodies. So a lot of those bones, those people were repatriated too. But it took an act of Congress to be able to get back our cultural belongings. I think that before anyone, if you find something on your land, before you give it to a museum, the Indigenous people in the area should be contacted first and let them determine what it is, number one, and where it should go. Some things were utilitarian, used every day to eat. And some things had great power and still have great power and are part of our religion. So I think that, that yes, you want things to be seen, but you have to make sure what it is. Some things we really shouldn't be looking at.
Well, the other thing is I'm thinking about the Native American burial grounds, the Indian mounds, as they call them. I mean, it's wrong if we go in and dig those up looking for jewelry or whatever is in them. That's wrong.
Well, that's one thing is supposed to be protected. Yeah, in fact, many of our old people say they don't want to be buried. They want to be cremated because they don't want someone digging them up 100 years from now. And but you just look at the disrespect.
Oh yeah.
That, but yet if they want to put in a highway and it's a white ceremonial, a white graveyard, they'll just, move everybody. And they'll be kinder about it. But with us, no. And the looting and just on a spiritual level, I'd be afraid to have something like that around my house. It doesn't belong to me. It has a soul, has a spirit, and it needs to go where it belongs. It doesn't belong on my living room wall. So, but some people they don't respect any group other than their own. That's why when, people say they want this country to be diverse, I say, no, I want this country to be inclusive. Because with inclusivity, we're all part of the same. And diversity, it's like, this month we'll celebrate Native Americans, but forget about them until next November. But if we're inclusive, if we're part of the curriculum, if we're part of people's everyday routine happenings, respect, then we're all part of it, not just on special occasions. And then I think, you know, we know that as Americans, we have a lot to learn from each other, and it gets stopped, you know, well, that person isn't the right color, the right political affiliation, you know, and here we have all these great resources in our own country. We can travel the world and not have to leave our country when it comes to culture and learning about other people, but we're very stupid. That's why I like living in New York City, because I can go out of my door and smell food from around the world, you know, and I don't understand it, but that's one thing. Talking about burial sites, the first peoples here were very pragmatic. So you'll find things, I should say, things have been found in burial sites that are not from that place. And we had these great massive trade routes, and people said, oh, well, you know, we don't have that that material here, but we sure can use it. So we'll trade, you know, for it. So there are things, you know, people were pragmatic. They recognized that people had something, people who were different from them had something valuable and were worth listening to and learning from. So I feel if you're going to live in this country, then you know, should be embracing indigeneity and our attitude about the world.
How can people today show up for Indigenous peoples? Well, does that mean stand up for them? Show up? Okay.
I think so. So I would call it how to be an ally for Indigenous peoples. And this is wonderful. I'm going to read a couple for you. Care for the earth, give thanks frequently, respect and support Indigenous sovereignty, learn about treaties, remember that treaties are the supreme law of the United States, demand that our nation honor its treaties, consider future generations in all of your actions. Very important. Question and resist stereotypes, including team names and mascots that mock and ridicule Indigenous people. Learn about and reject the doctrine of discovery. Reach out to your Indigenous neighbors and say, how can we help you? You know, how can we support you? Slow down and listen more than you talk. Notice where you are. Live with gratitude. Live lightly on the earth. Work to end global warming. Support renewable energy. Stop hydrofracking, dirty coal and uranium mining. Don't co-opt native cultures or ceremonies. Return sacred objects. Read and promote the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day every October 12th. Learn about people indigenous to wherever you live. Read Native authors. Support Native craftspeople and artists, businesses, and events. Remember that all beings, animals, and plants are your relatives, not your resources, and appreciate the diversity of nations, cultures, and people. This is my latest book, which is Indigenous First, a history of Native American achievements and events by Visible Ink. And it's a fun book. It has some things in it that are not fun, but it's also, it's like, oh, I didn't know that. It's an aha moment. I didn't know that. And it's fun, especially those of you who like Jeopardy. And many of the things we've discussed today are in here. And then this book, this is another one of my books, which gives you a background of a lot of things that we're talking about today. And so history and current issues. And then for kids, and I believe this is how you found me. This is an activity book for children. Kids Guide to Native American History. And this is considered one of the best books for the classroom for this century. This many different groups. This is a very pretty book. And anyway, I could go on, but it's important to know. It's important to realize that we've been left out of the history books, but now there are resources. Native people are getting published. There are more resources available. So, got the internet. Most of us have the internet, which can be a wonderful resource when learning about Indigenous people and finding out ways to support and to help. And we need support, like with your votes and the things that you do, to remember that these lands are very special. This is a very special planet to all of us. Thank you, Janet, because you're more informed than a lot of people that I've talked with over the years, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I think to myself, what a wonder